So, in this presentation, I'll be talking about life scripts and how rewriting your life script can effectively change your life and your destiny. In the first part of this introduction, I would really start to talk about how much we are aware of these life scripts, because most of us are aware that we create stories in our heads all the time, all right? But what most of us are not aware of is that these stories are running the show and are also creating our reality and whatever is happening around us. So we might be aware that there is something going on in our heads that we create these stories, okay? But what we might not be fully aware of is how deep the impact is these stories have on our lives. When we daydream, for instance, fantasize, create what-if future scenarios, loop on some past event, and create multiple versions of it, we are writing story scripts in our heads. That is what we're doing, as simple as that. Now, the mind becomes this storyteller that spools out hundreds and thousands of stories, sometimes in a single day. And some of these mind stories, some of these scripts can be very brief, like a passing thought, an idea. But some of them are longer, much longer than that. And in fact, some of them might have these complicated and intricate plots as much as a 5-season Netflix series would have, okay? Which takes me to the point that storytelling is an extremely powerful tool if used consciously. And the key phrase here is used consciously. Because the trouble is that most of the time these scripts and stories are run unconsciously. And more importantly, a script can be a very bad one that affects our life in a very negative way, in a disastrous way, without us even being aware of it. And we kind of keep on repeating the same experiences. We keep on having the same experiences and repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again until we become fully aware what is actually creating them. That it is something inside of us. It is this script, this blueprint, these stories that we are playing in our heads that keep on reinforcing these scripts, that effectively are recreating over and over again the same situations that we experience in our lives. So the point here is that we need to first become aware that we are running these scripts in our head. And the stories that we are creating and telling ourselves have a huge impact on what we are experiencing in life. As I was saying and mentioning before, we are not usually aware of this. Okay? We are not usually aware of the link, of the connection, of the cause and effect link between the scripts that we write and run in ourselves and the effect of it outside of us. In particular, all those things that we are suffering but have always looked for their cause somewhere else outside of us. Okay, we externalize things. We try to find the root of the problem, the cause of the suffering, somewhere outside of us. Okay, the bad teacher when I was a kid, the abusive partner, so on and so forth. We try to find the cause of our annoyance, of our suffering, of our distress. We try to find the cause of it into, somewhere outside of us, instead of actually looking inside of us and trying to understand that there is a direct relationship between what we experience and what is going on inside of us, and the link between these two, between the inner and the outer, okay, between the micro and the macro, okay, is in these life scripts. That is the connection point. Now, let's talk a little bit more about mind stories. What are mind stories? And one of the peculiarities about stories, okay, mind stories, is that they are both written and experienced at the same time. If we had to translate this into using computer language metaphor, we would call it as having a read-write functionality, meaning we can read the stories and write stories. And most of the time, at the same time, simultaneously. Okay? So, for example, when we daydream something that could have happened, or imagine a future scenario, we are writing a story. We are effectively writing a story or creating a new story. Okay? When we experience life as happening to us, okay, we are passively being subjects to the story or victims to the story. So in this case, we are reading as opposed to writing it. But as I'm saying, most of the time we are both reading and writing, meaning that we are experiencing the story, we are playing it out, okay? We feel as if that story is real and we are, passive actors in that story. But at the same time, as we are playing it out, we are also reinforcing the script, okay? We are adding to it, we are writing it. So in a way, in a nutshell, we have both the roles of the scriptwriters or authors and readers. And as readers, we are being captivated by the storytelling of our mind, okay? We are part of kind of like the audience in a theater. So this is a good point to note that, and we will come to this point again later, but effectively what I'm saying here is that stories, we can experience them, but we can also write them. And this is very important to the main theme of this presentation, which is rewriting life scripts. Because if we did not have the possibility or the ability to actually write these stories, these scripts, then basically we would be pretty much helpless and pure victims of life, right? So a mind story can be a one-off short clip, as we were talking before regarding, the short stories that come and go briefly, that passing, fleeting thought, or a script that we have been writing and building on all our life. And the latter is of more significance because the stories that affect us the most are the ones that we have been rewriting for a long period of time, as these become effectively, they compound into beliefs and our whole personality. It builds our self-image. And these things, like our personality, our self-image, our beliefs, have full control over our reality. Because both what happens to us and how we interpret what is happening around us is through these, through the self-image, through these internal states, beliefs, our personality. So the stories we create and hold affect us on different levels. Sorry, the stories we create and hold affect us on different levels. For instance, they affect our emotional biases, the way we understand and structure information, and how we filter what we perceive through our five senses. So effectively what I'm saying here is that these stories are kind of create filters, okay? They taint, they paint, or create rather a filter through which when we interact with the world outside of us, it deeply affects how we make sense of the world, okay? Whether through our emotional biases, our likes, dislikes, our tendencies, but also how we make sense of the information that we are perceiving through our five senses. What do we do with it? How do we interpret it? Okay? How we make use of it? How does it affect us? They also shape our relationship to others and how we relate to situations in general. Once again, basically they affect all, I would say, all areas of life, because we, once again, we interact with the world and we interpret it and we make sense of it and we perceive it through these filters, through these internal filters. And these internal filters are pretty much being dictated by these stories. And the last point, before creating any confusions between stories and life scripts. Stories effectively create life script. Okay, a life script would be a much more longer version, a more permanent kind of story. Okay, the script. Whereas the many stories that we play out every day would be coming from this life script, but at the same time, as I was saying before, they keep on reinforcing and adding to the life script. So there is a very, very, very intimate relationship. Almost we can talk about life scripts and stories interchangeably because there is a very, very strong relationship there. We are playing out stories all the time. And the reason for this is that we are essentially consciousness. And while it is possible not to be consciously aware of something through the conscious part of our mind, we can never really be outside of consciousness. Okay, so in other words, that even though a lot of the things that are happening inside of us, we are unconscious of, okay, they operate at a subconscious level. But at the same time, they are operating nonetheless. There is consciousness nonetheless. There is always this a little bit of, how would I say, there is this a different way people look at consciousness, because in the Western scientific view, consciousness is purely attributed to what we are consciously aware of. Whereas in Eastern philosophies and other traditions, basically consciousness is something deeper. It's not entirely or it's not just about what we are consciously aware of. It runs much deeper than that. And even if we are not consciously aware of something, okay, it is still part of this vast ocean of consciousness, so to speak. But without going into the metaphysics of it, the point to note here is that consciousness is in the business of creating and having experiences. Okay, it's like a continuous live stream. There's no stopping. Okay, it's what it does. What it intrinsically does is basically create and have experiences. So the playing out of the stories is never ending. Once again, even if these stories are going on a subconscious level, okay, they are going on nonetheless. And there can never be a moment in a human life where there are no experiences going on. You cannot press the pause button on the experience. That can never happen. It might only happen perhaps, and still it is debatable, when you are going into the dreamless state of sleep, of deep sleep. But once again, there is, or for example, yes, it could also be, for example, in very, very transcendental state of consciousness, in this non-ordinary state of consciousness where a human can reach a point, even for a brief moment, where he or she transcends the experience and has no longer an experience of anything, But we're not talking about that, because that is a very, very non-ordinary state of consciousness. And even though important and beautiful and it's a possibility, it's not within our ordinary state of consciousness. So it doesn't happen all the time, right? Now, the last point in this section is how these stories play out, what roles we play, and what say we have in these stories is a matter of how our consciousness interacts with them. Okay. Another way of saying this is that basically, so we do not have the choice of pressing the pause button on consciousness. We will always be experiencing something, and we will always be creating experiences, whether consciously or subconsciously. We do not effectively have a big choice, a big say in that, but what we have a choice on, what we do have a say on, is what roles we are going to play in these stories and how conscious and aware we are of these stories. That is the choice that we have. Okay, but it's a very, very important choice. Now, I want to jump into briefly, before going into the main section of this discussion into what I call the script rules. So effectively, I have kind of like summarized and condensed four, let's call them rules, that make up a script. Okay, and more importantly, what would make a good script. Okay, because once again, it could be a bad script that we are running unconsciously, but what we are interested in is what makes a good story, what makes a good script. Okay, so the first rule in script writing is you need to have the knowledge and the awareness that you are always free from the story if you choose to. But most of us aren't. Now you might be scratching your head and saying, what's come again? Like, what is this about? Like, free from the story? The best way to explain this is by using some kind of a metaphor, okay? And try to imagine a situation, okay, a funny situation where we have this famous actor. Okay, think of any famous actor. I won't call out names. And it's a guy in my head. Okay, so this actor, this famous actor, is working on a movie, and he's a good actor. He's a damn good actor. Okay. But at one point, something fuzzy happens, okay, that he's taking his role so seriously, he's rehearsing so intensely, that at one point he loses the awareness that he is an actor. And he gets sucked into so deep into the story that he completely believes it at heart, and he becomes the role that he is acting out, okay? And this continues to go for days and weeks, and he gets more and more sucked into the story. He believes that all the other actors in the movie are very, very real, and so are the situations. And this is pretty much using also the metaphor of the Matrix movie, where the people inside the Matrix are unaware that what is happening to them their whole life is basically a simulation. And it seems completely real. They get hurt and they die, and they have emotions, so on and so forth. It's extremely real. But only when the actor or the protagonist in the Matrix, Neo, becomes aware, or remembers rather, that he is just an actor in a story, and all this is ultimately a story, is that he remembers that he is free from that story. Okay, and the point here is that when writing a live script, when writing a story, the first thing to be aware of is that you are always free from the story. So a funny way of putting it is never write a story that will entrap you, that will bind you, that will suck you in, okay? And like the actor, completely forgetting that you are ultimately free from the story, okay? So that is what that first rule is about. It's a tad metaphysical, I know, but actually it will make sense the more and more you think about it. Now, the second point, which I think is the most important rule in the set of four rules, says something like this: if you want to change the script of your life story, you first need to understand and be aware that you are already running a story script. You need to detach from the old story to start a new one. Because otherwise the question would be, how can you create when you are asleep? Now, this second point is, it follows up with the first rule, effectively, and with the example I gave about the actor being lost in the script, okay, in the movie, in the acting. And so for that actor to basically change his life script, Okay, now let's assume that he's still believing that the movie, the act he's playing out is very, very real. So in order to change that, the first thing he needs to do is to basically become aware that he is running a script and that he can be free from it. And before changing it, he needs to basically detach from it and say, aha, oh, okay, I'm awake. I am free. This was just a script and I can change it. Okay? That is what the second rule is saying, basically. The third rule says the best scripts are the ones that write a story that will ultimately help you be free from the story instead of being just a victim or just an unconscious character in it. So once again, this is more or less a continuation of the first and second rule. Okay, it is just emphasizing it more. Is that okay? To create a new story, you need to be aware that you were entrapped in a story first and foremost. But then, if you're going to create a new story, if you're going to change your life script, be sure to create one that will help you in a way become lucid of the fact, become awake, aware of the fact that it is a story. In other words, conversely, do not write a life script that will make you fall asleep and gets you sucked in and trapped in the story. Okay? It may sound weird, but there is a lot of sense that will become more and more apparent to you. Okay, as you ponder a little bit more about these script rules. So, expanding on this third rule, you need to build thoughts, feelings, and ultimately habits and beliefs that are giving you the greatest growth and expansion into your full realization, into the full realization of who you are. And here I would like to draw a parallel to one of my favorite subjects to talk about. I might be doing another presentation, particular about this topic of lucid dreaming, because there is there's a strong parallel going on here. When someone's, if you are a little bit familiar with the practice of lucid dreaming or what lucid dreaming is about, when someone trains himself to become lucid in dreams at night, of course, he primes his subconscious mind. Okay, in brackets, another way of saying learning a script. And so he primes his subconscious mind, he learns a script to become aware when a particular cue, when a particular trigger, a sign, is met in the dream. For example, you are in a dream and the trigger, the cue, is your hands. So you train your mind, you prime your subconscious mind, and you create this script where you say, look, whenever I see my hands in the dream, I'm going to realize it's a dream and I'm going to become lucid, I'm going to become conscious, awake in the dream. Okay, that's what lucid dream is. And then a reality test is carried out, which is also part of the script, of the lucid dreaming script. Following the test, one realizes he or she is in a dream and stops playing the passive character and becomes the author of the dream. Okay? So, what I'm saying here by drawing this parallel to lucid dreaming and lucid dreaming training is that when you create your script, your life script, what is it you want to become? What is it you want to achieve? What is it you want to grow into? Okay? Be sure to actually, in that life script, to create things, to encode things in it, to put in cues and signs and triggers that will help you always stay awake, and never becoming like that actor that gets sucked into and becoming totally unconscious that he is playing out a story, basically. So that is the third rule of script writing. Okay, once again, it may sound weird, it may sound a little bit bizarre, but there is a lot to think about here. So I would even recommend to go over this section, this part where we're discussing script rules, because there is a lot of interesting hidden pearls of wisdom there that might emerge and make a lot more sense to you as you read them. And the last one is that the ultimate goal is to master the art of being a storyteller. Okay, so once again, the idea of rewriting life scripts is to make this big, huge shift from being the passive, unconscious actor in the story, okay, to become the author and the storyteller, okay, to make this shift from being the victim, okay, just passively experiencing and being a victim to whatever happens to you, believing that the story is real, completely real, and you are completely powerless to it. And shifting from that to become basically empowered and awake and aware to know that basically you are free from the story and you have the power inside, the freedom inside to change that story, to change that script. Okay, so those are the 4 rules of script writing. And now to continue with the last point, let's talk a little bit about storytelling. Because becoming a storyteller as against being a passive character essentially means being the conscious author of your life scripts and awakening the creator within. Okay? It involves, first and foremost, to be a watchful observer of your own stories first. Okay, this once again has connection to the life script rules I was mentioning just earlier on, that the first step is to be aware, is to become lucid of the fact that you are running a script and that you are playing out the stories in your head, in your life. What do you say to yourself often? Be conscious of that. Like, what are these common things that keep on coming up and up within you? These inner conversations, these beliefs, these attitudes that make up your view of the world. Okay? The power of storytelling is in the type and quality of stories we say to ourselves first. And this has a lot to do with what some books and authors, and especially in the field of psychology, refer to as self-talk. Okay, so the point here, and actually the most important point, is that the most valuable growth tool one can learn is inner communication. If you get this right, everything else can only become better and better. Okay? So, good storytelling is about being very careful which words to use and how to express them. What emotional tone, okay? In which emotional tone you're expressing those words. You need to ask yourself or be conscious whether the story, for instance, is an uplifting and inspiring one, or it's a disempowering one, or it's one that actually keeps on recreating the victim story. And let's expand a little bit on this and talk a bit more about self-talk, because self-talk is the #1 method for inner communication. Inner talk and inner conversation is going on all the time, okay? Some of it is on a very deep level that is not perceptible to the conscious mind, okay? Actually, out of habit, most of our self-talk we are not conscious of. But some of this self-talk is happening on even deeper levels. Okay, so some of the self-talk we can actually be very aware of by a little bit of effort. Some other self-talk, especially those parts of the script that we have been running for a very, very long time, need a little bit more effort to basically become aware of. Okay, self-talk includes thoughts, expression, images, feelings, commands, criticism. Okay. it doesn't have one modality. Okay, self-talk is not about blah blah blah. It's not about just the voice in your head, although that plays a very big part of it. But even imagery, when you play out stories in your head, you are, sometimes going really, really, really creative and vivid and realistic, visually. So it's also about like, feelings. It could also be feelings, and images and commands and criticisms. And to make a little bit of a parenthesis on this, because not so long time ago, I had this very significant dream. Okay, that's dreams are another topic of interest for me, especially when you start, being more aware of its language. Okay, the language of the subconscious, the way it expresses itself, the way it makes sense of things. And so basically, I was in this dream. Okay, I'll try to be brief as much as possible. So this dream effectively gave me a very, very good lesson about inner communication. And in fact, through this dream, I had kind of like the inspiration to, write more and do these presentation about inner communication, about script writing. So anyway, in this dream, I am in an apartment. Okay, it's not my apartment. I am renting out this apartment. And I am in a bedroom and I'm hearing noises coming from the living area. So I go to the living area and I see, well, a lot of things. There is a lot of noise, okay? There are a lot of equipment that is on, there is a radio, like one of those old-fashioned boom boxes, playing out like, music, and it was quite loud. And so I decided to basically shut it off. And I pressed the off button, but it did not shut off. So, I found a work around this, and basically I just opened the hatch where the battery was, and I basically took out the batteries, because it was battery operated apparently in the dream, and that did the trick. And then I looked on my left hand side, and there was like a TV, and it was like, playing a movie or whatever. And so I said, okay, there's this thing, like, I don't know who switched this one on, and I'm gonna turn it off. So I took the remote control and I switched it off. But then I realized to my right there was another TV, and so I used the same remote control and I also switched off the second TV. And that is where I noticed that one of the walls in the living area, there was kind of like it was partitioned by a glass door. And behind this glass door was kind of like another apartment, and you could see through. And there was this guy who was sitting at a desk, and his back was, against me. And he was quietly sitting at a desk, not realizing what is happening, all this cacophony and noise going on in my living room. And once again, the dream continues and it has more signs, but I really want to explain what all this kind of means. And so the apartment is my subconscious mind. The guy sitting quietly at the desk is the conscious part of my mind, is the consciousness, who is unaware, is quietly being he's distracted, like, focused on his work, not being aware what is happening under the hood, what is happening behind that door, what is happening inside the subconscious mind, okay? And what was happening inside the subconscious mind, and what it was trying to tell me through the wisdom of the dream, was that I was communicating unconsciously. The radio was on with a lot of noise, a channel that I did not choose, music that I did not choose. There were like 2 TVs streaming a lot of imagery, a lot of videos, okay? So that is inner communication, but at a very unconscious level. The conscious part of my mind was there sitting at the desk, not knowing what is happening subconsciously. And so in the dream, I took the conscious decision then, okay, to turn off that bad, wrong inner communication, okay? That is what basically the wisdom of the dream was telling me. So okay, I stepped a little bit aside here, and but it's a very, very interesting thing, and it's also kind of like shows you, It's a very important thing because dreams are also inner communication. They are actually very, very important in their communication. And so, what was interesting about it is that my inner communication was teaching me something about inner communication. All right. Okay, so coming back to this point, negative self-talk, okay, like in the example of the dream, is mostly critical and counterproductive to our growth and well-being. Okay, whereas positive self-talk is mostly something that is learned rather than comes as natural. Now the question is, why does negative self-talk come more natural and is almost hardwired? Well, the reason is that it comes through social programming and conditioning. Very often, what we think are our own thoughts are not our thoughts at all, but expressions people use to judge others. For instance, like how often do we catch ourselves saying to ourselves, "What the hell were I thinking?" or "What the hell am I thinking?" Okay, and that expression, "What the hell am I thinking?" doesn't come natural. That has been conditioned either at school, our peers, our parents. When the adults, says to the child, like, "What the hell were you thinking, kid?" Like, so that is an expression. That is it's even an emotion and a criticism that has been borrowed. It's a code that is not ours. It has been encoded in us. Okay, so a lot of negative self-talk, and this is what I want to say, comes natural because it has been encoded in us. Whereas positive self-talk is something that we have to learn to recode and encode ourselves. Okay. The next point I want to make is that to install the habit of positive self-talk, first you need to become aware of the negative self-talk. Okay, to be more observant and genuinely put yourself at task to weed it out. Once again, this has a lot of connection with script rule number 2, which says if you want to change the script, you need to become aware first and foremost that you are actually running a script. Okay, and getting rid of negative self-talk is already more than 50% of better inner communication. Really. So there are two sides of the coin. It's getting rid of negative self-talk, okay, is decommissioning that script, okay? And the other part is basically, installing the habit of putting more self-talk in your inner communication. But the first part of it is, again, being, one side of the coin is 50% of the work already done. So being more conscious of your negative self-talk, you would have already gone midway through the journey. Positive self-talk then becomes easier to install as a habit. Talk to yourself in a friendly manner and remember to say something positive and uplifting every so often through the day. Use words wisely. Use positive words and put out statements in the present tense. Okay, and this has a lot to do with affirmations. Affirmations go in the present tense, such as "I am really doing good at this. I am moving forward. I am progressing. I am confident. I am intelligent." Okay, so install the habit of using positive self-talk. Talk in a friendly manner and talk in the present tense. By time and habits, of course, these short statements will start weaving themselves into stories. And by the way, stories will in turn weave themselves into a life script. So positive and uplifting stories that will become your life script. Okay? Before reaching close to a full script, you will already have seen your life turn from night to day. Because this is not this is a progression, this is a life journey, this is a process. Okay, it's a beautiful process. And it's not like, okay, you have to really make 500 hours of positive self-talk before you start seeing the first milestone. Not at all. Not at all. So basically, even by just 1 hour, 2 hours, even less, okay, just by taking that first step, you are going to see the effect of it immediately straight away. Okay, so progressively, you're going to start seeing more and more your external life circumstances, your situation, okay, and how you interact with life change already. Okay, you really don't need to make 20 years in a cave and talking to yourself in a friendly manner to actually reach that point. It responds straight away. Okay, it's just a question of sticking to it and keep using it, until it becomes a habit. The other element of inner communication besides self-talk is self-expression. It's the way how you express yourself physically and emotionally. And the way you do that, the way you express yourself, reinforces your self-talk. Okay, so basically self-expression is the partner of self-talk because it continuously reinforces it. It also adds an accent to self-talk. So whereas self-talk is just talk, it's plain talking, self-expression adds I would say an accent to it. Okay, if you like, it colors it. It makes it more interesting, more deep, more meaningful. If you really want to drill in a positive statement, such as "I am feeling confident," try walking, breathing, and holding a posture that is confident. Just try it. Simplest thing to do, see what happens. And this has a lot to do with neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, okay? Which basically a good part of NLP, and NLP is used to basically reprogram the subconscious minds, reprogramming beliefs and so on. It is said that one of the most effective way of changing, reprogramming your beliefs is engaging with your physiology, is engaging with your nervous system. So it's not just about blabbing things to yourself, which is good, but also engaging yourself physically. Okay, if you even just for a brief moment, you try to change your breathing and try to mimic the breathing of someone that has a certain quality that you would like to emulate or that you would like to actually have, then even by mimicking the breathing, it makes a change that goes beyond the physiology, okay, that it becomes psychological, unconscious. It changes your subconscious programming. So self-expression is a very, very important partner to self-talk. They go hand in hand, okay? And the more you express your self-talk, okay, the quicker both of them will start working, okay, to ultimately recreate to change your stories and recreate your life scripts. Now, the last tool of inner communication, and possibly the most powerful tool in life scripting, is imagination. So we talked about self-talk and about self-expression, both of them really important tools in the life scripting toolbox. But the third and possibly the most potent tool is imagination. And it is not hard to actually understand why, because any story, but especially good stories, make use of the imagination. Okay, I cannot imagine a good story that was born out of a really dull imagination. Okay, it might be a story, but it wouldn't be a good story, right? So good storytelling starts from making good use of your imagination. By good use, I mean not leave your imagination run unconsciously to create negative scenarios, but to purposely use it to engage your consciousness into a reality you want to create. Okay, so making good use of the imagination, not let the imagination run wild, because ultimately even these negative life scripts that run unconsciously are propelled by the imagination, but it's an imagination that we are not making good use of. It's running wild. It's not being used or directed consciously. Now, visualization is an imagination tool, but not the only one. Okay, so a lot of people emphasize on visualization when they talk about imagination or creative work. But really, it's not the only tool, although it's a main one, because we see the world through our eyes. We are very visual. But it's not the only one. Once again, like NLP, with the discussion with self-expression and engaging your physiology more, NLP also likes to engage other modalities, other sense modalities, not just sight, but also sound and taste and smell and uh, and feelings in general. And the same thing can be applied here in the sense that to use more your imagination, you don't need just to employ visualization, but you could also use other modalities. For example, for me, sometimes I find it a little bit hard when I'm trying to imagine something that I have never yet fully experienced, right? It's very hard to actually visualize details because, let's say, let me give you the example of if I had to ask you, for instance, like to try to imagine like this particular place you haven't been, okay? Now you can visualize some things in general, but you cannot really go down to the nitty-gritty details because you haven't actually ever visited the place, so you don't have kind of a recollection of it. So what I do basically is that I use visualization in conjunction with something else, and this something else is basically quite, it may sound bizarre, but actually it works for me, is that let's say I want to imagine something that I want to achieve, a goal that I want to achieve, but I still do not have. So what I do is I create in my imagination, of course, I create like a conversation with my future self that has already achieved that has already been there, that has already created that, okay? And I use my active imagination to have this kind of chat, this conversation with my future self. And as I'm doing so, I'm using speech, I'm using talk, I'm using communication, which is non-visual. And I start getting responses, ideas like intuitions, which then I turn into visualization. And so this is an example of how two things, apart from visualization, can work together. Because I also employ feelings, for example. So there is conversation, there is visualization, there is feelings. So anyway, the thing is how two or three different aspects, three different modalities can work together to basically enhance your active imagination. Okay. Now, going back to this point, so you can employ all the senses as long as they evoke a reasonably clear and powerful touch to the story by creating emotions. Okay, I'm going to read this again. You can employ all the senses as long as they evoke a reasonably clear and powerful touch to the story by creating emotions. Because emotions are the litmus test of the imagination. If the imagination is good enough, it will ultimately and effectively create an emotion. Okay, that is the litmus test. If it is creating an emotion, and especially a positive, uplifting emotion, then you know that you are using your imagination really well. Okay. Once again, like anything else that goes in the mind, you can also use it in a negative way, unconsciously. And sometimes, many times that happens, when we start feeling odd and we start feeling these negative emotions, and then we become conscious that we were basically drilling into a negative story and using the imagination to basically enact that story, and effectively it was creating a negative emotion. So emotions are a good test, a good indicator. Okay, they are the litmus test of that show us that whether we're using our imagination in a good or not so good way. And the last point I would like to make is don't be afraid of using the imagination. It cannot be overused, but it can be misused. As I just mentioned, it can be misused by using it to enact a negative story. But if you're using it correctly, it can never be overused. Okay, it doesn't have a counterindication saying you shouldn't be using it more than so much a day, or so much often. By using it more often, you are now training your mind to use it consciously and positively. And like a puppy, being trained to follow your orders and be loyal to you. So you are making imagination to work in your favor, to work by your side, okay, to be loyal to you, and to actually help you in this journey, in this very, very important journey of deepening your inner communication and using your inner communication more positively to change the story, to be more conscious of your stories, and ultimately change your life script to a more empowering and positive one, which in turn will change your life and change your destiny. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation. This is where it ends. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And well, I'll see you the next one. And if you are following this presentation via the YouTube channel, would appreciate a like if you want to keep on seeing more videos like this. Subscribe to the channel. Same thing would apply if you came across this presentation, this talk through a podcast. So once again, thanks and goodbye.